What if we told you that people may have actually found Peppa Pig's real house in the real world? At first, that sounds like one of those random internet claims that pops up every few months. Someone sees a building that vaguely looks like a cartoon, and suddenly it's proof the show is based on a real place. But this time, things are a little different. Because when we looked into it, we didn't just find a building that looks like Peppa's house, we found something much stranger. Not only does the building look almost identical, but the entire town around it looks exactly like Peppa Town. The houses sit on hills. They're spaced far apart. There's even a lighthouse nearby that looks suspiciously like Grandpa Rabbit's lighthouse from the show. And the deeper we looked into this place, the weirder the story became. Because the building people think is Peppa's house isn't just an ordinary building. It's a church that's almost 900 years old, and it's sitting on top of something even older. A Viking burial mound. So today, we're going to take a full look at the place people think inspired Peppa's house, compare it with locations in Peppa Town, and figure out whether this might actually be more than just a coincidence. But before we get into the real location, we need to clear something up. Because if you search online for Peppa Pig house in Denmark, you'll probably see a bunch of TikTok videos claiming they already found it. The problem is, most of those videos are pointing to the wrong building. Two different churches keep getting mixed up. One of them is located all the way at the northern tip of Denmark, near the town of Skagen. This church is famous because most of it is actually buried in sand dunes. Only the tower is visible above the sand. It's a fascinating place. But it looks absolutely nothing like Peppa's house. The walls are shaped differently, the roof isn't right, and the building doesn't sit alone on a hill the way Peppa's house does in the show. So that one's easy to rule out. The building that actually matches Peppa's house is located about 50 kilometers south, near a small Danish village called Lundstrup. And this is where things start to get interesting. Because sitting just outside the village is a small, white church with a bright red roof. From a distance, it almost looks like something a child drew with crayons. A simple triangle shape, clean white walls, a bright red roof sitting perfectly on top. And most importantly, it's standing completely alone on top of a hill. If you look at Peppa Pig's house in the show, you'll notice something very specific about it. It's never shown in a crowded neighborhood. It's always sitting by itself on a hill. There are no buildings right next to it. Just a house, a hill, and a road leading up to it. Now look at this church in Denmark. It's the exact same situation. You can see it from miles away because it's sitting on the highest point in the surrounding area. If you're driving toward the village, the church is one of the first things you notice. A single building on a hill with a bright red roof. And the similarities don't stop there. When you look at photos of the church from the road, the view looks strangely familiar. The road curves slightly toward the hill. The building stands alone. And the shape is so simple that it almost looks like it belongs in a cartoon, which is exactly the style Peppa Pig uses. The show intentionally draws buildings in the simplest possible way so children can easily recognize them. Triangle roof, square walls, bright colors, and when you compare Peppa's house with this church side by side, it's honestly kind of hard to ignore the resemblance. But here's where the story gets even stranger. Because the hill the church sits on isn't just any hill. It's called Klanghøj. And Klanghøj isn't natural. It's a Viking burial mound. Over 1,000 years ago, Vikings built large mounds of earth to bury important people. These burial mounds were often placed on high ground, so they could be seen from far away. They were meant to mark important places in the landscape. And later, when Christianity spread through Scandinavia, churches were sometimes built on top of these ancient burial sites. The idea was that the location was already considered sacred. So instead of destroying it, they simply built something new on top, which means the building people think inspired Peppa's house is sitting on a hill that has been considered an important location for over 1,000 years. But the coincidences don't stop there. Because before the creators of Peppa Pig ever made the show, they actually worked on a completely different animated series. It was called The Big Knights. The show came out in 1999 and followed two medieval knights living in a castle on top of a hill. The art style looked incredibly similar to Peppa Pig. Simple shapes, bright colors, buildings sitting on hills overlooking the surrounding landscape. So now we have an interesting chain of connections. A church sitting on a Viking burial mound. A location that's been important for centuries. And the same creators who made Peppa Pig previously made a cartoon about knights living in castles on hills. But here's the part that really made us stop and look closer. When we zoomed out on the map around this church, we realized something surprising, because the church wasn't the only building that looked like it belonged in Peppa Town. In fact, the entire area looked like it could be part of the show. And once you start noticing it, you can't really unsee it. Now here's where the story takes a strange turn, because once we zoomed out on the map around this church, something immediately stood out. The church wasn't the only building sitting on a hill. In fact, almost every building in the surrounding area sits on its own hill. Instead of tightly packed neighborhoods like you see in most towns, the houses here are scattered across the landscape, each one standing by itself, each one sitting slightly elevated above the land around it. And suddenly, the entire region starts to look very familiar, because that's exactly how Peppa Town is designed in the show. Think about how Peppa's world looks. Peppa's house sits on a hill, but so does Susie Sheep's house, and Rebecca Rabbit's house, and Madame Gazelle's school. Even the lighthouse where Grandpa Rabbit works is perched high above the sea. The buildings in Peppa Pig are rarely shown clustered together like normal neighborhoods. Instead, they're spaced far apart across rolling hills, connected by winding roads. Now compare that to the area surrounding the Danish church. If you look at aerial photos or Google Maps of the region near Lundstrup, you'll notice something interesting. The terrain is full of small hills and dunes, and houses are scattered across those hills almost exactly the way they are in Peppa Town. Some of these houses are small coastal cottages built in the early 1900s. Others are modern homes, but many of them share the same basic look: simple shapes, bright roofs, and a location that's slightly elevated above everything around them. It almost looks like someone designed the town using the same simple logic the Peppa Pig animators used: house on hill, road connecting hills, repeat. But the similarities don't stop with houses. Remember earlier when we mentioned a lighthouse nearby? Because just a few kilometers away from the church stands one of the most famous landmarks in Denmark, the Rubjerg Knude Lighthouse. And this lighthouse sits in a very dramatic location. It's built on top of a massive sand dune overlooking the North Sea. From the edge of the cliff, the lighthouse has a clear view of the entire coastline. Ships passing through the water would rely on its light to guide them safely along the shore. Now, if you've watched Peppa Pig before, you probably remember Grandpa Rabbit's lighthouse. Just like the real lighthouse in Denmark, Grandpa Rabbit's lighthouse sits high above the sea. It stands alone on a hill. And from the top, you can see everything happening along the coastline. The similarities are honestly pretty hard to ignore. A lighthouse on a hill near a small coastal town. Houses scattered across the landscape. A single building standing alone on a hill that looks suspiciously like Peppa's house. And the more you explore the region around Lundstrup, the more the pattern repeats. Hills, houses, wide open space, and roads that wind gently between them. But there's actually a reason the area looks like this, and it goes back thousands of years. During the last ice age, massive glaciers moved across northern Europe. As those glaciers melted, they left behind uneven terrain full of dunes and rolling hills. Later, Viking communities built burial mounds on some of those hills, creating even more elevated points in the landscape. Then centuries later, churches and homes were built on the highest ground, not only because the view was better, but also because being on higher ground helped avoid flooding from the sea. Over time, the entire region developed a pattern where important buildings were placed on hills, which just so happens to look exactly like the layout used in Peppa Pig. So when people first claimed they had found Peppa's real house, they weren't completely wrong. There really is a building in Denmark that looks almost identical to the house from the show. But what makes the discovery interesting isn't just that one building. It's the fact that the entire surrounding region shares the same layout as Peppa Town: houses on hills, roads connecting them, a lighthouse overlooking the sea, and wide open landscapes stretching between each location. Whether the creators of Peppa Pig ever visited this specific place is still a mystery. But when you look at the buildings, the hills, and the overall layout of the area, it's easy to see why people think this might have been an inspiration. Because once you start comparing Peppa Town with this part of Denmark, it really does feel like someone took the landscape, simplified it into bright colors and simple shapes, and turned it into the world of Peppa Pig. So maybe people didn't just find Peppa's house, maybe they found something even bigger. They found an entire town that looks like Peppa Town. And once you see the similarities, it's honestly pretty hard to unsee them.